Time for a video focusing on the Space Marine Sniper Elite. Let's talk Eliminators in 40k 10th edition and what these infiltrating Marines with bolt snipers and las fusils can do on the table. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd do a focused unit review on the Primaris Eliminators and talk through their damage, defense, utility and synergies on the tabletop. We'll take a look over their datasheet and weapon profile and special rules, what else they can get from buffs and other models on the table, and compare their sniper damage against a couple of likely competitors. Eliminators in 40k are Phobos armoured Primaris Space Marines, usually armed with bolt sniper rifles, though if they need to they can also be equipped with the high power las fusils to melt through troops with heavier armour. They often range ahead of the Space Marine battle force, scouting out enemy lines, and in particular trying to eliminate targets of opportunity, whether it might be a key enemy warlord or leader, or taking down key bits of equipment or even light vehicles with their las fusil. The kit from Games Workshop is either £35, €45 and $60, really quite expensive for a unit of just 3 models I think. Even if I say that the sculpts look rather nice, sneaky marines in Phobos armour and camo cloaks, generally considered some of the nicest ones out of the Phobos range at least. Besides their multi-part plastic kits, they also did appear as monopose models in Combat Patrol Space Marines throughout 9th edition, the Phobos themed box with the Impulsor, so it's not impossible you might be able to pick up some slightly cheaper on eBay if people are selling some individual ones. I'd bear in mind though that those monopose ones don't come with the las fusils or the bolt carbine, so aren't going to have quite as much flexibility. If you were looking to pick up the new plastic kit though at a bit of a discount, Element Games in the UK sells them for just under £30 at the moment, so a 15% discount, and Gap Games in Australia has them at just over 21% off currently at around 66 Australian dollars. Both are linked in the video description, and any purchases made after clicking those links do help support the channel a little bit without costing you any more at all. Getting onto their rules in 10th edition though, and a squad of Primaris Eliminators will set you back 95 points. It means that they are fairly pricey for standard Intercessor style bodies on standard Space Marines, around about the equivalent of 32 points per model as you only get 3 in a squad. Their stat line's pretty much as you'd expect, regular Space Marines with 2 wounds, a 3+ save, only objective control 1 as they're not troops or anything. They do get the Infiltrator keyword, which means they set up in the midfield should they want to, means that you could perch them on a high building with a good line of sight perhaps, and they also have stealth to keep them safe against enemy shooting a little bit. A -1 to hit does make them a tiny bit more durable, though I still don't think that they're going to be overly tough given the 32 points and the regular intercessor body. That's a bit too much to overcome even for a -1 to hit. It does feel like a bit of a change from 9th edition when they could be one of the most tanky Space Marines about. Really quite big boost to the saves with the camo cloaks in cover. Perhaps the primary signature weapon for the Eliminators is the bolt sniper rifle. You get the choice of either these or las fusils for the squad, and the sergeant can take an instigator bolt carbine if you'd like. The bolt sniper rifles used to have all sorts of different fancy ammo and then mortal wounds on 6s. Now though, outside of the unit's special rule, they get a fairly simple profile. On the move, each one gets a single shot hitting on a 3+, a strength 5, AP -2, and a big flat damage of 3. Really quite nice for character hunting or picking off heavy infantry there. They've got the heavy keyword, so if they're static they get to hit on a 2+, and of course they have the precision keyword to pick out the characters out of units. Their unit special rule is called Mark the Target. This means that if the squad's stationary, then their weapons get devastating wounds this turn. So these guys really do have quite a few things making them want to stay still for a turn, both getting an extra +1 to hit, and also hitting extra hard with the devastating wounds if you luck out and get a 6, puncturing through invulnerable saves. For a single squad when stationary, you average around about 1 failed save against a standard Space Marine character. I feel like that's definitely enough to make support characters pretty nervous, though they're unlikely to be killing any one character in a single round of fire from the bolt sniper rifles. You'd have to be rolling fairly hot, but every so often you might just get an unexpectedly good flurry of fire and just shoot one character dead straight out. The other option for the unit are the las fusils. Fairly punchy firepower that was kind of good for killing light tanks in 9th edition. Their profile's got a pip of extra toughness going up to strength 9 since then, but that does mean that they're going to be wounding a lot of mainline battle tanks on 5s rather than 4s or 3s these days, which isn't exactly ideal for them. They get a single shot hitting on 2s if stationary, strength 9 AP3 and damage D6, and again they'll get that devastating wounds for Mark the Target if they choose to remain stationary. I think devastating wounds does definitely help them out a bit. Obviously that's not going to come up most shooting phases, but when it does it could be kind of big. Just ploughing through invulnerable saves or killing multiple models in an infantry unit is quite nice. They're perhaps going to be most efficient at killing medium to heavy infantry. Say, for example, they kill around about one Terminator on average per round of shooting, and can worry light vehicles like Rhinos, getting around about one failed save through for an average of 4 wounds total, but it goes down quite a lot if you're firing against toughness 12 things like Land Raiders. It's kind of an interesting choice between the bolt snipers and the las fusils. Las fusils will generally be better against the majority of things that aren't characters. They've got better strength and better AP. They might be a tiny bit less reliable with taking down medium or heavy infantry with the random damage. You might roll low. But because they aren't sniper weapons, it does mean they're more competing with other powerful things in the Space Marine armory for direct fire. Say things like Hellblasters with their fairly savage plasma guns, or even the Desolation Squad. With their new higher points cost, they're actually not too far away from the points cost of Eliminators, just a little bit more, and for that you get a massive missile launcher plus indirect fire. Finally, the last option for the squad is that Instigator Bolt Carbine, which you can take on the Sergeant. This one's kind of an interesting weapon choice, as it does give up a bit of firepower. You only get the one shot that hits on 3s without the heavy keyword. It's only 24-inch range, and is strength 4, AP2, damage 3. At least a few times it won't be too much worse than the Bolt Sniper Rifle, but you might feel the difference quite a lot if you're shooting against something toughness 5. This one I do find interesting though, because it trades off a bit of damage of the units to give them a rather good positioning rule. The Instigator gives them the reposition under covering fire rule, which means that in your shooting phase after the unit has shot, if it contains an Eliminator Sergeant with the Bolt Carbine, you can immediately make another normal move. You can't charge after doing so, but that could still be very powerful for jump shoot jumping essentially in and out of cover, being able to move shoot and then move again to stay hidden, or just move shoot and then move once more and just get a very long distance in one turn, 12 inches away from where you started. That could be enough to get them onto midfield objectives or far-flung bits of terrain that the opponent might not be able to reach, and they could hide there. It's an interesting upgrade. I think it's probably worth it if you're taking the bolt snipers anyway. You do give up a bit of damage output and a bit of range, but unless you're absolutely dead set that you're camping them at the top of a ruin and not moving them, then the extra movement is probably worth the trade-off, as it does give them some potential shenanigans against the right foes. For the last fusils, they've got kind of different targets that they want to shoot at. Could still be very good, but maybe pushes the Eliminators into being used as a bit more of a utility unit, and they are perhaps just a tiny bit expensive for that at 95 points. So that's the core unit. In terms of buffs that are available for them, they of course have access to Oath of Moment, helpful extra damage output against focused targets, though they perhaps feel like they're a unit that's going to just chip into a bit of extra fire against that marked target, as opposed to necessarily one that you choose Oath of Moment because they can damage them. I feel like their damage output just probably isn't quite good enough to justify that. Against tanks and vehicles with las fusils though, then re-rolling everything to get the 6s for mortal wounds seems kind of fun. Could give you at least a decent chance of some mortal wounds puncturing enemies' unnatural defences. For the standard Gladius detachment for the Space Marines, the combat doctrines with Devastator Doctrine would certainly help advance and shoot for the Eliminators. That could give them a serious amount of movement with the Instigator Bolt Carbine should they want it, move, advance, shoot, and then move again. Though at the same time it might have only so much value, seeing as they're often a squad that you don't really want right up in your opponent's face or anything, more sort of skulking around the edge of the board and being annoying to deal with. Beyond things that affect the entire army, I'd generally say they want to be a kind of low investment unit. I don't think they're really a particularly efficient one to be spending loads of stratagems on all the time. They cost less than 100 points and don't have spectacular damage output for that cost. It just often seems to me like you might be best off spending the command points buffing some really big gun with a whole bunch of Hellblasters or a huge block of Terminators or something like that, and things for the Eliminators, even if they're efficient, might still be a bit niche. If the enemy did manage to move to catch up with them, I suppose you could use squad tactics to do a reactive move and just keep them safe from the enemy once more. I guess that could really up the annoyance factor with the Instigator Bolt Carbine, moving both your turns and the enemies if they try and assault you. If that move makes the difference between them being charged and not being charged, it would be well worth it. Storm of Fire could give them an extra AP. Might be alright if maybe there's a critical character you absolutely need to kill, and one shot puncturing their armor would make the difference. Otherwise just seems a bit unreliable, and I guess if you really wanted to feed in extra command points into damage output, you could just re-roll a wound roll with a CP potentially. For buffing characters, I feel it's kind of similar story in that they're just too small units to be efficient for them. A Phobos captain is perhaps the biggest thing. If you have one in your army somewhere, you could allow them to redeploy after knowing who has first turn, really quite a big deal on forward deployment units, though I think he's unlikely to actually want to run with the Eliminators himself. Again, probably best off with some bigger Phobos squads. The Phobos Librarian could mean that you're not targetable greater than 12 inches away, but it seems like quite a big ask to pay 75 points for that ability. If you're going with that kind of thing, maybe you're best off taking a big block of infiltrators or incursors instead. Finally, Space Marines do have a fair few other units that could help them out. Incursors to get them hitting on 2s even when moving, the Storm Speeder Hailstrike for extra AP, the same as just about any focused Space Marine gunline things. And I did think it was kind of interesting that you could make an Impulsor sniper boss with a couple of squads of these flying around in one of those. I suppose that would be one way to give them fast movements to have their snipers hit the enemies at long range. Being off the board though, they wouldn't be able to access their devastating wounds as they counter-equipped by the Impulsor. And while it does seem kind of fun for a bit of a meme loadout, I feel like in reality it's not going to be all that efficient. Finally, for other buffs and things, I feel like most of the other chapters have kind of minimal benefits for ranged sniper units. Black Templars, as with most units, could add a bit of extra survivability with their feel no pains, but probably less value than the Gladius overall for them. Deathwatch, on the other hand, do have a bunch of range synergy. Their doctrines can give you lethal hits on one turn and sustained hits on another, both of which are good buffs that the snipers will very much like to amp up their direct damage. And depending on the target, you could crack out AP-1 for their Kraken rounds or anti-infantry 2+ for their Hellfire rounds. I feel like often you're going to have a better unit to use that on realistically, but if it made sense to wound a character on 2+ with those bolt snipers and maybe have a chance of removing them off the board, could be worth a CP. I was a bit disappointed that the new Spectre's kill team only allows you to use 2 Eliminators in the squad. Seems that they're no longer a crafty way to get yourself an entire unit of bolt sniper rifles anymore. At least for sniper damage, I thought it could be interesting to weigh them up a bit against their competitors both in the Codex and outside of it. Where Eliminators were just massively more efficient than Scout Snipers before, it seems that things are a bit more even now. Scout Snipers are now 75 points for 5 of them, get Strength 4 AP2 and Damage 2 sniper rifles, and arguably a bit more tankier than the Eliminators against certain firepower, 10 wounds at Toughness 4 and a 4+ save with Stealth, plus have a super powerful special rule that means that they can't be shot outside of 12 inches. I feel like that is really a big advantage compared with the Eliminators, definitely helps out with their slightly mediocre durability. Plus just being a cheaper and expendable unit I think does have advantages of its own, means you're a bit more likely to think that it could be worth it to use them expendably to screen out the enemy or move block or something in the matchups where sniper fire doesn't actually matter that much. Comparing their actual damage output, the sniper damage is very similar. If you're targeting a marine character with a 4+ invulnerable save, you get roughly the same damage output no matter whether you're scouts or eliminators. And for other toughness values, the scout snipers tend to do a bit better against either toughness 3 or toughness 6 characters, but a bit worse against toughness 5 where they're wounding on 5s and the eliminators on 4s. I feel like overall you're probably weighing up the value of move shoot move versus can't be shot outside of 12 inches, and potentially the other loadout options like say the missile launcher for the scouts or the las fusils for the eliminators. I will be honest, I think out of the two I probably slightly prefer the sniper scouts over the eliminators, just in terms of their raw numbers and special rule, plus being a more expendable cheap unit at 75 points, though the eliminators do definitely have their advantages with the bolt carbine and things. Another interesting competitor could be the Vindicare Assassin as well. He's 80 points for a single lone operative one, also getting Infiltrator's stealth, and he can't be shot at long range the same as the scouts. Being a super elite assassin, he gets all sorts of special rules, hitting on a 2 with strength 7, AP3 and damage D3+3, devastating wounds, ignores cover, critical hits get +3 damage, and he can move and shoot and still hit on a 2+. Finally, as if that little lot weren't enough, he can also get a once per game shield breaker round that ignores all saves as well, which would be quite a big deal. Still, having said all that, despite all the advantages, it's still just a single shot at strength 7, so you'll only be wounding things like Space Marines on a 3+. If you're trying to take down a 4+ invulnerable save Space Marine character, you'd have around about a third chance to get your average 5 damage through. Overall, that is a bit less than the Eliminators, only averaging 1.7 wounds per turn, though it does go up on the turn that you use the shield breaker round, giving you slightly over a half chance to puncture saves. Kind of an interesting one, lower damage overall, but a bit cheaper. It's better against toughness 3 and 5 to 7 units as well, wounding them either on a 2+ or a 3+ for the most part. Definitely stiff competition for the Eliminators. Again though, I do feel like lone operative is really quite a big advantage for the Vindicare. Preventing him getting shot until you're kind of close is really big. Overall, I do feel like Eliminators have a lot of competition for their niche as snipers, kind of somewhat balanced against the Vindicare and the Scout Snipers, though I might be personally tempted to take their Sniper Scouts a little bit more at the moment. I'd say that overall both of their weapon options kind of just seem merely okay, but perhaps not super standout. I think to make them work, you both need to try and get value out of their damage output, and both their forward deploy and double move type options. They should be able to get a lot of that firepower to exactly where the enemy doesn't really want it. and could even potentially be a unit to camp on some far-flung objectives in the right situation. You could play them a bit differently against different foes. If the enemy does have lots of easy to kill buffing characters, then maybe deploy them a bit safer and put big value on their sniper fire. If they don't, or it's not very relevant, you could maybe be a little bit more aggressive with them and play for the midfield objectives and using movement shenanigans to frustrate the enemy army. Still an interesting and playable unit, I think, though. I do kind of suspect that they could be one to watch when the next Codex Space Marines comes out. They're almost certainly going to have some sort of Phobos infiltration type force. Wouldn't be too surprised if they get a few more options when that comes out. Let me know your thoughts on these Phobos Camo Cloak infiltration guys, though. How would you rate Eliminators in the current Codex Space Marines? And do you think they're strong or a bit lackluster for the points cost? Will they be making it into your army? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more for the Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.